the more you realize, wait a second, we can build on top of this. Well, hey there, welcome back. I have some interesting stuff for you if you haven't read my new book, and I have some bonus stuff for those who have. I will try to be brief and succinct, and I appreciate you not laughing at the fact that I just said that. If you could have anything you want, wouldn't you? You want to lose some weight, you want to be healthier, you'd like to make more money, you'd like to change your job and your career, you'd like to be more patient with the kids, you have a project you want to complete that you're dragging your feet on. So why don't you do all these things? What's stopping you? Is it your desire? Well, you seem to want to do it. Is it your knowledge? Well, most people have the knowledge, or they can just Google things these days. So very quickly, I found two things that were really interesting that stood out. First of all, Sigmund Freud, the father of modern psychology, his flagship theory was called the pleasure principle, in which he believed that everyone just sought pleasure and avoided pain pretty much in everything they did in their life. And again, not to waste too much time on that, but we can get into a whole hour-long conversation on how you can break that stuff down. But that doesn't explain why you want to do something and you don't do it. Because you want to doesn't mean it's going to give you pleasure. So then I looked at top performers, and I read books on top performers, and all the books basically told me the same thing. All the studies pointed to one thing, and it was repetition. Again, things still didn't make sense. People would do all this research and they would just sort of drop it. And you and I, normal people, are thinking, well, how do I use that? How do I become one of these people? And that's where I figured out what was on top of all that stuff. What was behind all that stuff? What was in the way of all that stuff? What was behind you, shoving you into having successes? What was in front of you, preventing you from failing? What was in front of you, preventing you from having success? These things in our life, in our psyche, and I called them monsters and unicorns. And that's where because came from. It's about the causes in our life that I have named monsters and unicorns, because there's only two flavors of them. Some of our decisions, some of the things in our lives involve an entire audience of monsters and unicorns working against each other, working together, and so forth. And the most important things in your lives are because monsters and unicorns that are very powerful that you've put into place. So if you haven't read the book, you really should. It's a short read, it's a good read, and it's going to help you with worksheets as well and really dive deeper into what I just said. So now that you and the people that have read it are kind of on the same page here, let's get to something really interesting and powerful. Something that happens to me with some of the experimental psychology books that I read are this intensely strong feeling of encapsulating it and sharing it with the world. That happened with The Status Game, that happened with Three Voices, and that happened with Because. And while I was writing Because and finishing it, I thought, this is one of those foundations. And what I mean by that is it all makes sense and goes together, but I feel like I'm just scratching the surface. Because the more you think about what the book's about, the more you realize, wait a second, we can build on top of this. I liken it to discovering addition, and then you're like, well, wait, if stuff adds up, you can subtract stuff. And then you're like, well, wait a second, what about this multiplication thing? And then you get into all this stuff. I mean, you build this foundation, and you're like, well, if that's true, and that's really what our brains enjoy. Our brains are constantly testing the underpinnings of our reality. And you can see this every time you give somebody a fact about something or you talk about something. They're testing it. I've learned not to be offended by that. But the odd thing is when I talk about a lot of this experimental psychology stuff, I don't get the "you're crazy" looks. I get the spinning gears in which somebody is absorbing it and going, well, wait, okay, oh yeah, right? Oh, okay. And sometimes I get a huge smile. In fact, that just happened to be in a meeting recently where somebody was asking questions and they kept asking questions and they kept smiling bigger and bigger every time I would answer them. So what I was saying was making sense, but it was new information. And there's not a lot of things in life where we get new information, but it's also exciting and it makes sense because we kind of feel like we've learned everything, and we certainly haven't. Back to the foundation. So there are two new things that have come out of the book Because, even though it was just published less than a month ago. For those of you who have read Because, you might go back to it and read a couple things, and you're going to get a huge kick out of this. For those of you that haven't, I implore you to read it in whatever form you find it in. In reviewing your life and looking at the worksheets and just thinking about the whole concept of a monster that pushes you away from pain, which can sometimes be a bad thing, and a unicorn that pulls you towards pleasure, which sometimes can be a bad thing, you might find something that will either encourage you or really make you go, And so here's what I want to say. If you discover in your life that the majority of what you're doing right now is because of a monster, in other words, avoiding pain, you are probably in a survival mode. You wake up every morning and you go, oh my God, I'm going to run out of money. Or, oh my God, this health thing, I hope it gets better. Or, oh my God, my marriage is falling apart. Or, oh my God, I don't have anyone and I'm single and I really need to find someone. Just one of those things can mean you wake up to a monster. And the monster says, I gotcha. We need to do whatever we need to do to not feel hopeless and feel bad and feel poor and feel alone and feel unhealthy and feel our mortality and so forth. These are huge things, right? That's certainly not an exhaustive list of all the things we worry about, right? And speaking of worrying, I mean, you can be in a fairly decent, solid place in life, but still feel like you're in survival mode because you're worrying. I mean, if you wake up worrying really deeply and constantly and you're missing sleep, you can feel like you're in survival mode. You can have lots of stability and have the greatest job in the world, but if your boss is a horrible person, that's all you're going to think about. You're going to wake up and go, oh my God, I got to do this. I got to write this email at 4 a.m. Oh my God, I wrote it. I rewrote my email 7 times because they're just going to get upset. Oh my God, that's still going to upset them. You're trying to avoid pain. You're not seeking the pleasure of not getting yelled at. You're avoiding the pain of not getting yelled at. You're trying to avoid this conflict and this constant attack on your character and redressing and all that stuff. And I'm just using the bad boss as an example. It's an example of someone who's in a good place. They might have a good marriage. They might have good everything, but they have a bad boss. And a bad boss is pretty much like choosing a bad spouse. It'll make the hugest impact in your life. It's amazing. That's not a great existence. That's not what we're meant to be experiencing. People go into survival mode all the time. People go into survival mode again for all the reasons I gave you. They go through a breakup. They go through a health issue. They lose their job. They have financial setback. There's maybe something happens to their house. People go into survival mode even when it's not about them. If they have empathy and they care, if they have a loved one who's going through a terrible thing, you have a teen daughter who's just gone way off the rails and that's what you're dealing with every day. You have an elderly parent and their whole life keeps flashing before your eyes because now you're going to lose them. I mean, these are things that can put you in survival mode even though they're not about you. And that says a lot about you. However, if you wake up every morning and there's a giant unicorn standing over your bed and going, guess what we get to do today again? Isn't that a lot more desirable? And again, there are monsters and unicorns in your life, and there always will be because they are neutral parts of your psyche that, again, avoid you from experiencing pain and try to push you to seeking pleasure because that's what we're all about. Being a good person can be seeking pleasure. Doing things for other people is seeking pleasure. Being an upright person, having integrity, all those things, that lofty goals that we think of as higher values and so forth, are seeking pleasure. So let's not lose sight of that just because it sounds like you're just going to go eat some candy and do some naughty stuff. It's some pretty high level stuff. So waking up to a unicorn is really kind of what we want to do, right? So for purposes of this particular 10-minute podcast, I think it would behoove you to think about whether you wake up to a monster or a unicorn, primarily. And again, if you've read the book, you see that we are all about monsters and unicorns. They're in every single thing that we're doing. They're in our most important things we do. They are in our avoidance of trauma. They are in our quirks, our personality, everything. They're not going away. They're part of who we are. We can manipulate them. We can place them. We can remove them. We can counter them, which is all in the book. but it's part of who we are. But what I'm trying to say is it's an interesting thing to give some time to consider whether you're waking up to a unicorn or a monster. Period. I did tell you there were 2 new things from the book, but perhaps that'll be the next episode. Stay tuned. Thank you. Thank you for reading, and thank you for being you. I appreciate you, and I value you.
Living life every day, late at night, not okay. All I want, and I pray, all I need are some better days.
I want to announce that my new book, my 10th, is out. It's called Because, the fundamental psychological building blocks that enable you to, or prevent you from, accomplishing anything, everything, and nothing. Check it out on Amazon. It's only $9.99.